welcome to today's study. We have a very special guest, Mr. Shrey Dunkar from Motilal Oswal. Has been managing Motilal Oswal's value strategy for close to over 14 years now. A CA by profession and a CFA, qualified as a CFA charter holder. Mr. Shrey has been managing this for a while, and the value strategy is very unique to Motilal's philosophy and has been their flagship strategy for a very long time. The strategy is close to 17 years old now. So we will be very glad to have you, Shrey. Welcome to the call. And broad outline of the call will be, we will discuss the strategy. Will tell us what's happening with the fund and where performance is what kind of performance is likely to be expected, and in terms of the portfolio companies and portfolio strategy in general. Before we begin, I like to begin with an analogy. The portfolio is close to 17 years old now and has seen a lot of cycles, right from the 2008 crisis to the demon, probably the best periods from 2014 to 17, and now the COVID period. So the strategy has a memory of its own. If we had to personify the strategy has has a memory of its own, has a reaction, or probably has a personality of its own, and it's that way a very unique strategy. There's a lot of learnings I'm sure that's going to come from this strategy. So over to you, Shrey. We will begin with whatever you have to say, and then we will take up questions from audience and investors. And let's have a good time, everybody. Over to you, Shrey.
Thank you, Sankalpo, for having me. So basically, we have a small presentation that probably I'll run past, and then probably we'll leave enough time for the Q&A. I hope my voice is audible to all. So what are the first principles which guide us to make sure that we remain steadfast on the course and stay disciplined in the way we think and the way we do things? And I think the first principle out there is probably says it all and does it all. We will not buy what we don't understand, even if it's a large part of the index. And the essential part of this is that whatever you own, you essentially become, whenever you buy a stock, you essentially become a co-owner of the company. And then it's not just a stock price. It's a business that you buy. You're not buying a stock price. And as a result, what happens is that we ensure that we need to understand as many moving parts as exist, and as many cycles, and how this management or how the business and operating model will kind of evolve with evolving times. And that is one of the most important principles. The other principles which exist elsewhere as well remains: we maintain liquidity, we maintain our philosophy, which is QGLP, and we make sure we spend a disproportionate time in allocating and selecting. We will cover all of these aspects in the later slides. There is a small pictorial which is given over there of Calvin and Hobbes, and actually that is genuinely the crux of investing. They say that the secret of success is being at the right place at the right time. But as and as we've seen over the last 20 years also, it's never easy to forecast, and it's never easy to get the timing right. And that's what becomes more important, is you have to be in the right place, in the right stocks, and just hang around and wait for the time for either revenue market share or the profit market share or the market caps or the compounding to kind of kick in and take care of itself. Moving on, this is broadly a very brief snapshot of the portfolio. As you know, this is a large cap bias portfolio. So it's about 72% invested in large cap and 25% in mid cap. And we are, as per the mandate, we can go up to 35. And we carry little cash because we don't take calls on the markets. And when you talk about QGLP, if you were to just snapshotly look at it, the ROE of the portfolio is upwards of 18%, which is higher than Nifty. The portfolio growth that we expect over the next 2-3 years will be upwards of 16-17%. The longevity of the portfolio, because all these themes are themes that we think can keep snowballing from more than a 5-year time frame, and thus it lends a significant amount of longevity in this portfolio, and which results into lower churn as well. And we ensure that we are buying it not at any price. We are not buying quality at any price. We are buying quality at reasonable price, and which is reflected that the overall portfolio PE is about 24 times. On the right-hand side, you will see the sectoral mix. Broadly, there is 34% financials, 20% insurance, another 15% healthcare, 8% autos, and the rest kind of capture the rest. Broadly, to decipher further, what is the quality of business? So when we take quality, you break it into further 3 pillars. The first is the quality of business layer. The second is the quality of company, and the third is the quality of management. In quality of business, we do analysis of profit pools, consumer facing, how much is the disruption, how much are they prone to disruption. So what looks good today may not look good tomorrow, and how high is the competitive or how low are the competitive dynamics and the intensity therein. The second is the quality of the company, where there is enough past, as these companies have been listed for long, there is enough past to suggest that they have the ability and they have delivered ROEs higher than the cost of equity. They are a positive operating cash flow. We are extremely obsessed with this concept of operating cash flow because no businessman will run any business if this is not positive in a reasonable time frame. And we also obviously, like a typical investing principle, we look at sustainable competitive advantage. The third vector is the quality of management, and that is something where we try and do our level best to make sure that we get this right. And where we expect the companies that we invest in have unquestionable integrity. They have the competence, and they have demonstrated through the last good times and the bad times of the past. There is a growth mindset because India is a country where a satisfied promoter with a good business may be no good from a shareholder perspective, and that promoter should have enough skin in the game to ensure that our interests are aligned. When you really cut the portfolio in a simplistic way into a 2x2 matrix, so there is 2 aspects to it, right? One is your revenue growth, and the second is your margin trajectory. So in the next 3 years, so the way you may want to read this is 47%, which is the G square. 47% of our portfolio is in businesses where we believe we will get margin expansion also along with revenue growth. 23% of the business, which is where we believe revenue growth will be higher, margin optionality or margin expansion expectations could be lower. But the revenue growth will outstrip that.
Shrey, I think there's some problem with the sound. Can't hear you. Can you just check?
Is it? I can hear you. Is it audible now?
I can hear you, but people have been, saying on the call that it's not audible. So,
okay, you can hear me clearly?
I can hear you. Let's just confirm before we, proceed.
Okay, so how do we do that?
Asking on the chat board.
Okay, sure. You give me a signal when I need to get going again.
Yes, the sound is clear. Please, sorry to interrupt. Please.
No problem. So there's 25% of the portfolio where we believe revenue growth could be modest, but the scope of margin expansion could be very, very high. And thus, it still features into a high growth phase. And there are other businesses where we believe the revenue growth and the margin trajectory is lower, but there is either they're available at a very good valuation or there are more undertone optionalities built into the business model. As we discussed, longevity framework, the other way of cutting the longevity framework is that we have about 50% of our portfolio, which is in healthcare, so to speak, where we are trying to become more self-reliant as a country, and the in-home consumption, which typically is considered as a secular trend. The other is a value migration trend, where we are talking about businesses where profit pool shifts from inefficient businesses to efficient businesses. And that, again, typically we've seen value migration kind of persist over decades and decades. It doesn't get over for long. So that's why that, again, lends to a high longevity framework. The lowest longevity framework could be the reforms one, where we are talking about a lot of companies that get benefited because of multiple reforms that have been undertaken over the last 5 years. And the impact could be short-lived, but still it will kind of outlive over 3 years or 5 years period. And the other is the asset modes, where we believe these are assets which are absolutely difficult to replicate and generate very high ROICs, and offers a great opportunity to grow in a sector which is tailwinded. Just to explain a few themes in depth, the immunity boost, which we call as a healthcare theme. In the healthcare business, typically if you look at the table below, it encapsulates a very important observation, which is if you look at the second last column, which is the healthcare spend as a percentage of GDP, when the GDP per capita for all these other countries, which is China, US, and Japan, was the same as it is today for India, which is at 2,000 GDP per capita. And if at that point of time you look at in China, the healthcare spend as a percentage of GDP moved from 3.9% to 5%. And mind you, China was where India is today in 2006. So that's almost in 14 years, the percentage of GDP went from 3.9 to 5. On top of it, you overlay the GDP growth of China, which has been itself very high. So as a result, what you experience in China over the last 15 years, that is almost 1.5 decades, is that you've seen a growth of healthcare companies, healthcare sector, healthcare wallet share expanding upwards of 15 to 17%. Likewise, in US, if you really see when US was where India is today, which was in 1950, which was almost 50 years ago. So we are literally 50 years behind US. Healthcare spend was about 4.6%. Today, they spend about 17%. Likewise, in Japan, Japan was where India was in 1970, which is 30 years ago. And they were at 4.4, and they are today at 11%. So that's what we what we believe, that as we keep climbing the GDP per capita curve, and which will happen, it's an inevitable. The first and foremost spend shift that we will see was in healthcare, and mind you, we had this expectations even pre-COVID. Post-COVID, it only accelerates this trend. So what we thought will happen in 5 years will probably now happen in 3 years. And when I talk about healthcare wallet share, it is not just about consuming or getting the right hospital care. It's also about making sure that you have the right ecosystem of diagnostics, of vitamins, of wellness, of making sure that there is enough insurance penetration so that your hospital bills are not paid by you, but rather paid by the hospital or by the insurance companies. India is very peculiar. In US, 70% of the bills are paid by the insurance companies, and in India, only 30% of the bills are paid by the insurance companies. So there is a massive scope for that to increase, so that our healthcare system can get better and without hurting the consumer's well-being. The other part on insurance is also that as you would have noticed, that we have a very high allocation on insurance in our portfolio. And that has been true for the last couple of years now. And we remain extremely steadfast on our view on that. And there's for a couple of reasons. First is that unlike banking, insurance has no risk on the asset side. In banking, all the risk on the asset side gets clustered around an economic distress environment, which is like what we are facing today because of COVID. But in insurance, even an epidemic or a pandemic like COVID has very little impact on its asset side. So that is what I think is one of the very big differentiators which lends more secularity to insurance and less cyclicality versus banking space. And the second thing is that in insurance, globally, we've seen that the top 4-5 players gain significant market share. Unlike in banking space. In banking space, at any point of time, you will have 20 to 30 relevant banking names operating in the economy because the banking economy is that large. But in insurance, what happens is that globally, no matter whether it's US, China, whatever, how big the economies are, still the top 5 players continue to predominantly dominate the industry. And as a result, they tend to get benefit the most. And this is what we expect to see here also. It's already visible. Top 5 players are 90% of the insurance industry. And I think going forward, this trend will only accelerate. It won't diminish. The third is obviously it is very capital efficient. Like how in banking, every now and then the banks have to come to the markets and raise capital. Unlike that, an insurance company really doesn't need to raise capital to grow its business. So it is self-sustaining. And because of its self-sustaining, the shareholder wealth creation opportunity is so much higher because of the absence of dilution that exists. Also, the underlying ROEs of the industry itself is upwards of 20%, which makes it even more compelling a case than banking, where the peak ROEs in banking will be capped at 18%. But these, the most capital efficient insurance companies have an ROE upwards of 25% already. So you can imagine the kind of economic value add you kind of accrete as a shareholder for every period of you continuing to hold on to an insurance business. And the last but not the least is it's a multi-decadal opportunity. We are so underpenetrated. I think within financial space, this will be one of the most underpenetrated sector. And as a result, we believe the runway remains very, very high. The other nuance which I wanted to highlight is if you look at the graph on the right-hand side, the economic designation. Now, what happens is that, insurance is a product for 25, 30 years. And, we've given a bubble chart over there. And if you will see, like when you talk about, when you think about hailing a cab or taking a cab, whether it's Uber or Ola, you do not differentiate Uber and Ola so much in your mind, because at the end of the day, you're going to be in the cab for about 1.5 hours. Likewise, so the time taken to deliver the service, the lesser it is, the lesser the relevance of a brand it is. Like, for example, in a bank FD, 70% of the bank FDs is tenured less than 1 year. And when you are, taking just about a 1 year, whether you bank with an HDFC bank or whether you bank with an ICICI bank, there is very little, rate differential that you will observe. In equity investing, it's again longer, because it takes 5 years minimum 5 years for equity investing to show the magic of compounding. And thus the importance of trust is much higher than putting a bank FD versus putting it in equity investing. In insurance, that is a distant number one there, because the time taken to deliver the service is upward of 20 to 25 years. And that is why the trust is paramount. Because the last thing you want is you've taken an insurance company from a company which doesn't exist after 25 years. And that's what is the reason why globally the big keeps getting bigger in insurance companies. And the top 5 companies in India already have a 90% market share. And they will continue to gain market share. They will never lose market share, even over the next 2 decades. The other, concept that we talk about and we pride about is value migration. Value migration is nothing but it's essentially where the profit pool shifts from the inefficient business to the efficient business. Whoever is efficient, customers will prefer that. And as a result, the profit pool will shift. A certain example of it is Indian IT and Indian pharma. 40% of the pharmacy business have that, or the medicines that are sold in US are sourced from India. That is because our Indian cost of R&D, because we have a far superior engineering talent, and we have the ability to manufacture these pills at a fraction of a cost at which a US will take to manufacture. And likewise in the IT case, because we have abundance of engineering talent, it becomes very easy for the cost arbitrage to starkly stand out, resulting in more business shifting from countries even like US to India. The other is the inter-industry migration, right? I mean, what we saw from railways to airlines, right? And then from full cost airlines to low cost airlines. So within the industry also, whoever offers a far better value for money proposition, you tend to move within the industry. So essentially what we are trying to say over here is, whenever we think about the concept of value migration, all we try to think is that who is he going to take business from? Because at the end of the day, most of the businesses that we own in the portfolio, market share gain is something of extreme importance to us. Reforms, there are many reforms we can talk about, but we've just picked one easy one over here, which is the IBC. Historically, we've seen over the decades that, whenever the big industrialists have defaulted on the loans, they seldom had any, fear of anything of any regulation because they literally control the legal system. This is the first time there is an bankruptcy code which at least instills some fear that promoter cannot, his misconduct will not be taken for granted, and he will be taken to cleaners, or the asset will be taken away from him, as what we've seen with SR Group, what's happening with SR Group. And likewise, what we will see is, which will result into a far lower eventual NPL accretion. Even COVID, although however scary it may sound, it will not come close to what we've seen in the past in terms of the eventual NPL outcomes. So essentially, this is how the portfolio gets stacked up, across the names. And as we said, right, for us, price is extremely important. We do not think that over the last 50 years, all the books that have been written on valuations and margin of safety are deserved to get dusted or be thrown in the dustbins. We truly believe that you have to be cognizant of the price you're paying to buy growth and buy quality. If you buy quality at any price, eventually that quality will not create wealth over a sustainable period of time. And as a result, what we see is our portfolio is stacked up very reasonably, very well in terms of valuations. This is one thing that we tend to be a lot more disciplined about, because this is one of the most difficult part of investing, as to when to sell. And this is where we kind of made it simple for us so that we can be more disciplined about it, is where we believe we have done a misjudgment on either quality or growth, or the valuations become such that it becomes indefensible for us to continue to hold, no matter how good the growth and how good the quality remains. So just to give you an idea on the portfolio construct, we are a concentrated portfolio. So although the weighted average market cap is about 1,70,000 crores, the top 10 stocks is about 66% of the portfolio. And we deviate a lot from the index because we buy only what we understand. And as a result, the active ratio is about 60-odd%. This is, the recent performance. As you will notice, calendar year FY20 TD till date is underperforming by about -5%. And last year we outperformed by 8%, and the year before we underperformed again. So essentially, in a concentrated portfolio, as we believe that it always takes 5 years to realize, you will see that this performance, we remain steadfast. We haven't made much changes to the portfolio, because we believe the same portfolio will catch up in performance as the earnings growth have already been significantly higher than Nifty in the last 4-5 quarters. The other thing is the anatomy of the fund. If you look at the total years of the fund, there's been 16 years, 17th year running. The positive alpha years have been 9, and the negative alpha years in 7. So you actually, if you really think of it, if you lasted the entire 16 years of journey with us, broadly the number of good, happy years and the number of sad years are almost similar. There's just a gap of 2 years. But still, we've delivered a very heavy alpha of about 4%. And we've generated a absolute return of 21% over 17 years, which essentially implies that if you invested 100 rupees with us, today you must be sitting with 2,500 rupees. The other way to think about this portfolio is because it has a very, very large vintage of about 17 years. And if you look at this rolling return pattern, and which is what the most important slide according to me in this presentation is, if you look at the 5-year rolling returns, how many times we've delivered negative returns over any 5-year period over the last 17 years. Mind you, in the last 17 years, we've been in a bull market only for 6 to 7 years. So we are talking about 10 years of, so to speak, not so great markets, and 7 years of a roaring bull market. And so that's why it's a very representative cohort. It's not a very skewed data point. But if you look at over a 5-year rolling basis, there is less than 1% chance that the portfolio will deliver negative returns. Over 10% of the returns, there's an 80% chance that we will give 80% of the returns. And over the last 5 years, the median return is 15%, as one would expect if overall returns over the last 17 years is 21%. And so even in a 3-year basis, although our alpha instances is about 75% of the times over a 3-year period we've given alpha, but over a 5-year period, 94% of the time we've delivered alpha. All it seems to say is that there are times when you can look wrong for 3 years, but the same portfolio, provided the portfolio is not getting churned out, if the same portfolio has the full power, full throttle power to make sure that it catches up and delivers an alpha in the remaining 2 years of that 5-year period. And that is the journey that we are in, and that is the comfort and the confidence we have, thus resulting in low churn even in a year where we are underperforming. This will be the final slide where according to us, these are the key portfolio differentiators. We have a track record of multiplying money 25 times in the last 17 years. We have an active ratio of 60%, and still the portfolio P is lower than Nifty P. The portfolio ROE is higher than Nifty ROE, and the growth will be better or similar to Nifty, worst case scenario. So we firmly believe that this portfolio has every characteristic to outperform in the residual years. We remain index agnostic. We do not buy what we don't understand, no matter how large it is part of the index. We select on the basis of upside, but we allocate on the basis of downside. So we are very, very cognizant about margin of safety, and that is what gets reflected very well in the allocation and the selection. And we tend to move away from the heavy expectations of the current rock stars, because there's always a recency bias that the market has. What has done well in the last 1 year, 2 years is typically has the highest marketing value, so to speak. But we tend to deviate a lot from those because invariably, if that has happened, then you will observe margin of safety would have got compromised in those stocks, and thus we believe there will be lesser scope to make money. Well, with that, I think it's sharp 6 o'clock, and I think I've Sankalpo, as you had suggested, I've wrapped it up in 30 minutes. I can't hear you, Sankalpo. I think you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. So I think that you've been very accurate. So to the viewers, the answer to the trivia question is Peter Lynch. Peter Lynch, one of the legendary investors on Wall Street, managed close to $1 trillion in assets, and he delivered 30% CAGR managing the Fidelity's fund. So the answer is Peter Lynch. So let me just get you up to date, Shrey. While you were discussing the strategy, we did a quick polls. We actually did a couple of polls, and my investor friends today, the question asked was, what is the most important quality in an investor? So the gentlemen and ladies present in today's call, 51% say that discipline is the most important aspect of investing, and then comes patience. 1/3 of the investors feel that patience is the second most important thing. Is the most important thing. And stock selection, only 14% of the people today felt stock selection is the most important thing. So there might be other aspects also. But since you said that the fund has a vintage, and we know that kind of a vintage, like I introduced, there comes a personification to the fund. So in those terms, what do you think in terms of discipline or in terms of patience or in terms of stock selections? How do you weigh in on the value strategy and your personal style of management? Is something that I would want to begin with. It's a little bit philosophical, but I hope you'll be kind enough to take that question.
No, it's a great question, Sankalpo. Actually, what happens is that, many times it's about how deep or how hard have you worked on a company to understand the company. Because why it matters is not in the good times. In the good times, when it's making money, you feel like a rock star, you think you've done everything right. But in the bad times, it's when you need that gumption to stay invested in the company. So if you are investing on borrowed conviction, invariably there is a very high degree of chance that in just at the bottom of the stock price curve, you will be either forced to sell, or you will not have the stomach to probably double up on the stock at that point of time. And we've often seen that. So, and that's why we become very, very clear that this product probably will be one of the lowest churn product over the last 17 years. And and we actually think there is a way to invest. And if you really think of it in a very different light, look at all the famous investors that we talk about, be it Warren Buffett to Rakesh Jhunjhunwala here to Radhakishan Damani, Ramdev Agarwal. Each one of those big investors have made money by staying invested in 4 or 5 stocks, which will make 60 to 70% of their net worth for over 15 to 20 years. And mind you, it's not that every year those stocks would have done fantastically well for them. But the crux is actually discipline and patience. And in my view, I think it's more patience than discipline. In discipline, you have to just make sure that you have to keep reminding yourself that you have to stay very true to what you have communicated. So we do communicate margin of safety, which we will not compromise. We will not buy stocks which we will not understand, which we don't understand, no matter how popular it is in the current times. And we will take bold calls, like how you see it in insurance. We have taken bold calls over the last 3 years, and which we remain very confident even today about. So I think it all boils down to your own mental framework, your humility, and your ability to see when you are not getting sucked into the momentum that the market typically has an ability to suck you in.
Right. So, we will, right before we move on to other things in the session, let's just address the elephant in the room. And, the Motilal Oswal PMSs or mutual funds have not been, performing as they would have, earlier. So, and it's quite, when I look at the 10-year CAGR and the since inception CAGR, it's quite out there. So what do you think is going to turn around for Motilal? Actually, we have heard this answer from Mr. Naveen Agarwal on our previous interaction. So what do you think will happen, or what is that you have done with your respective portfolio? And then maybe you can give a broad overview at the AMC level or at the house level. What have you done? Because typically when we say a large cap fund, large caps have just led this rally. Okay, and being a focused large cap portfolio, there's still some lag or deviation from. So how do you address that? Is basically what I think investors will want to know.
So Sankalpa, the most important thing is market has its phases, and if you will really notice in the last 5 years in specific, what has essentially happened is that whenever the growth environment is getting weaker and weaker and weaker, which has been the case in the last 3 years since the time I've taken over the strategy. What happens is wherever there is growth, it gets overpriced because there is a reducing growth environment or tailwind in the economy, and then this COVID happened, right? So essentially, your growth just evaporated, and as a result, what happens is the second thing is in every economic distress, we've often seen this polarization happens, which is like, truckloads of returns will be made by a few handful of stocks, and which is what we have seen. And, which is what actually I would, also love to show here with one slide, which captures it. Oh, it's not here. Just hold on, please. Let me try this. Just hold on, please. I'm trying to get a slide which can explain a lot of it. So essentially what happens is that, in the last 5 years, you have seen returns being made. So, okay, let's keep it simple. When do returns get made? Returns get made on 2 counts. The first is your earnings growth, and the second is your P re-rating or D-rating, as the case may be. In the last 5 years, earnings growth has been far more muted than what we had thought, but P re-rating has been far higher than what we would have thought. And P re-rating is a construct which the market gives you. That is very difficult to predict whether the PE of this company will go up in future or will fall in future. Because that is a science which is very difficult to crack, especially in a very volatile country like India, where DCFs really don't work. So essentially, all you do is you land up pricing assets, and as a result, what you've seen in the last 5 years is so different from the last 15 years, where the last 15 years was completely a mirror image of earnings growth and no re-rating, de-rating. But in the last 5 years, you only made money out of re-rating. And re-rating is a sign of dumb money, or a sign of passive money, or a sign of momentum, or the sign of, in a growth scarcity, wherever there is growth, whichever companies are giving whatever level of growth, market tends to overvalue because it is very risk averse, so it goes and hides in the safe assets. And that is one of the reasons why you've seen the kind of polarization that you've seen across, and not just in India. This is the phenomena which is visible even in US and even in China. So if you really look at our index, our Nifty index, this chart, there is 15 stocks of the portfolio are actually trading where it's similar to a Nifty level of 15,000. But the remaining 35 stocks are actually trading, which seems to suggest that the Nifty is actually at 8,000 odd levels. And that is what gives you an idea of how disproportionate the value gap has become in the popular and the non-popular stocks. The other thing that I would like to highlight here at this point of time, and take the liberty to extend this answer a little bit, is if you really look at it, that there is a decadal framework that always happens, right? And if you look at this decade of 70s, gold was the best performing asset and US was the worst performing asset in the world. In the following decade of 80s, Japan was the best performing asset, but gold was the worst performing asset. So from best performing, it suddenly became the worst performing. Now, in the following decade, US was the worst performing. Now, US suddenly becomes the best performing asset, and Japan becomes the worst performing asset. Now, same thing, you go back to the decade of our golden decade, which was 2000 to 2010, where India was the best performing asset and US was again the most underperforming asset. And then in the next decade, again, you saw US coming back and India being the worst performing asset. Now, if this pattern, which is really a decadal framework, right? We're talking about 1970s to 2020s. It's a very long period. And if this pattern is true, and if this pattern has been true for so many years, it's a very high likelihood that India will be the best performing asset versus US being the worst performing asset in the next 10 years, probably. That if we were to go by the pattern analysis. And likewise, right? And you look at it now, this is something we did at a global asset class level. Now, if you look at it at a company level, right? If let's imagine we were at that peak of our decade, a golden decade that we had of 2000 to 2010, please look at this table here, which is, BHEL, Steel Authority, all these names had given 34% returns, 32% returns. These were the best performing stocks of that decade. And they had delivered 25% return over 10 years, which is very stellar. But what happened if you would have bought into this popularity or momentum at that point of time, or any point of time during that decade, the next decade, you would have barely made even 0.6% CAGR returns. Now, imagine if I come to you with a portfolio looking like this today. Bajaj Finance, Page, Berger, iShares, Balakrishna, Britannia, Abbott. If I come to you with a portfolio like this, which again in the last decade has delivered 20% CAGR returns. Today, this is the portfolio which will look extremely beautiful and extremely easy to convince. As I said, right, they will have the highest marketing value. But the fact of the matter remains is, if history has to be proven right, which often proves right, then there is a very high degree of chance that these stocks will not deliver the similar set of returns as they have already. So anybody buying this portfolio today, the probabilities suggest that you will make very mediocre returns over the next 10 years. That's the probability looking at the last 50, 70 years of history. And this is what the discipline aspect comes to, right? That you have to have that courage to look stupid in the short run for a better long-term outcome. Because eventually, it's not rocket science to say these are great companies. There is no rocket science. I think even a second grade student will tell you these are fantastic companies. But what a second grade student will not be able to tell you is, are they available right price? Are you paying a right price for them, no matter how great they are? So essentially, it's like this: Maruti may be a great car, but will you pay 40 lakh rupee for a 10 lakh rupee car? You will not pay 40 lakh rupee for a Maruti car. And essentially, that is the crux of investing, Sankalpo. I hope it was a bit of a longish answer, but I really thought it was a very imperative question, and I wanted to discuss it in a bit.
So, Shay, there's an old proverb, and we have been using it quite often these days. It says the proof of the pudding is in eating. So I want to take a quick message from you. You can give a little detailed message to you, to the investors today. We have a lot of investors already invested in the value strategy. Okay. So what is your message to them? And what happens is that in my experience, a lot of times, certain kind of stocks, like you said, polarization might be a factor, re-rating or growth might be a factor. And growth has overall been mutish, even at the GDP level. But these are investors. They have invested with a expectation of expertise. Okay, and so we'll take a quick message for the existing investors, those who have those who are invested in the fund for a while, from you live, and then we'll move ahead with the Q&A again. Over to you.
Sure, Sankalpo. So the quick message is this: that we continue to remain invested in those companies which has, so to speak, today underperformed. And as long as we are not churning those portfolios out, the way you should read it is that we remain so steadfast and so confident that those companies have done well. Those companies will do well eventually, even though they may not be the flavor of the markets today, or it doesn't have a marketing value. The second aspect is, please try and understand in investing, the most ultimate gospel truth is earnings growth. At the end of the day, if the portfolio is delivering earnings growth higher than Nifty, it is only a matter of time that the portfolio has to deliver return higher than Nifty. And over the last 6 quarters, which is something that I remember, which we highlighted, which we'll be highlighting in the newsletter also, over the last 5 to 6 quarters, we have delivered earnings growth far higher than Nifty. Each quarter, not on a compounded basis. I'm saying each quarter we've done better. Also on a compounded basis, we've done significantly better than Nifty, and with the same portfolio. So not changing the stocks in between. So you can imagine, and if still the portfolio seems to be underperforming, in our mind, it only seems to suggest that the stock returns will catch up to the earnings power of their portfolio. So that is the only message. Stock price is a short-term measure. Profit growth is the real measure. So I would just urge investors to look at the real measure of performance of companies that you own in the portfolio, and stock performance will catch up sooner or later. We've always seen that in the past so many times.
Right, that's a very fair explanation. So amongst the sectors that you just showed on your slide, so auto caught my attention. The reason is that auto is something that has not been there in a lot of portfolios, and auto is a very macro based kind of a product. In general, the perception is your economy does well, there is easy credit available in the system, cars sell, people buy cars when they do well. So what is your view on the autos? And this is my view was very myopic, limited to the passenger vehicle segment. Can you just give me and the audience today a little bit of your conviction in the auto sector?
Sure. So Sankalpo, if you really look at it, you're right. Cars is a cyclical and it's a macro play. And if you really look at it, we've never seen cyclically such a bad phase for the auto sector in the last 2 decades, maybe. This time, the length of the slowdown or the length of the economic distress in the auto sector and the crack and the slump has been so sharp. So you are actually coming at a time when at absolutely, as you say now, the darkest hour of the auto sector. And at this point of time, we believe that likewise, we've seen in the past also, whenever there is a cyclical bottom, the revival in the sector is very high, because the need of owning a vehicle, be it a 4-wheeler or a CV or a 2-wheeler, is incredibly there today, and which is visible, right? I mean, 4 or 5 months ago, no one would have believed that auto companies will give flat YOY numbers. They'll be selling as many bikes as they sold pre-COVID. I don't think so. Anyone of us would have thought about it in April. But the fact of the matter remains, just in about 6 months' time, you're actually selling more vehicles, more two-wheelers than pre-COVID. So it is the fact is there is a need, and the need can get only fulfilled when sentimentally we are in a good zone. And sentimentally, it's always, you know, the mood swings as the economy has. If you buy a right need-based macro asset at the bottom of a cycle, inevitably you will make very handsome returns on its way up. Over to you, Sankalpa.
Right. So this is essentially that contra kind of bet right now. I mean, it's not too contra when we look at the numbers. I think even Maruti reported flattish numbers. So, the largest guy reports flattish numbers. You've got to believe that there is a lot of hope for the sector, right? Point taken. So you spoke about insurance as one of your high conviction bets. I'm going to come to that. However, let's talk about, let's take some time and talk about one of the largest index constituents and probably one of India's, brightest sectors is banking. That is the lending-based financial services part of it. So, we'll not spend too much time on that because everyone talks about banks. I think investors also today on the call will be more keen to know about insurance. So just a quick view on banks with everything that's going on and with new RBI, RBI coming up with new suggestions and, stirring up a debate. What are your views on banking? And then we move to insurance. Please share, some of your conviction with us on insurance. Over to you.
So Sankalpa, on banking first, as you would have noticed, banking sector regulations. So you touch upon regulation. I want to quickly get that out of the way. Honestly, we will continue to keep evolving on regulations. Still, regulatory wise, we are way stricter than the global norm. And that is what keeps Indian banking far more insulated than the global bank. The second part is that, where we are in this economic cycle for banking as a sector, honestly, it's very tough to call whether have we hit the bottom on COVID in terms of the visibility of the problem that we may have in the banking sector. But one thing I can say for certain, that unlike in the past, which has been repeated 3 times in the last 10 years, banks have always got a problem on their hand and then they provide for the problem. They make provisions or they take charges on the P&L. I think this is the first cycle where we are seeing banks saying, okay, I know something is going to be off because this COVID is uncharted territory. But as a cause of abundant precaution, let me provide upfront and ahead of the event rather than after the event. And that is, I think, the moot point. Today, as we speak, even today, most of the big banks and most of the banks specifically that we own have provided not just enough, more than enough. So even if this cycle was to get extended, even if COVID vaccine is to be getting extended, I do not believe there is more P&L dent that we have seen in the last 6-9 months. More than that, we will see in the next 6-9 months. And as a result, this is the management conduct which makes banking very, very safe even today. They may go through their own phases of volatility and mood swings because stock prices are stock prices at the end of the day. But the business as a whole, actually, and the balance sheet as a whole stands on extremely strong footing today than ever before. So that is on banking. Coming to insurance, I think I've touched upon in the slides, and I tried comparing because banking is something which comes intuitively to many of us. Insurance comes. That's why I compared insurance with banking so that you all can understand how we look at it, and that's why we have such a high weight. Before this webinar started, Sankalpo asked me this question, and I told him when people are not scared of owning 35% in banks, why are people scared of owning 20% in insurance? Whether in every possible way, the runway is stronger. The top 5 players' market share growth framework is stronger. The under penetration is the highest. The brand advantage is far more louder than a bank. And unlike in a bank, when you give a loan, all the incomes are accounted upfront. All the incomes are accounted ahead of time. But all your expense, which is NPA charges, comes after 4 years or 5 years or 3 years of you having lent to that customer. Whereas in insurance, it is all factored in on day one. Your cost of acquisition and your cost of or lack of persistency is captured on day one into your P&L. So you can imagine what you see is actually what you buy in an insurance company versus in a bank. In a bank, if you buy in a peak of a bull run, be rest assured you're buying. It's a recipe for disaster. Unlike in an insurance company, and as you would have noticed, since COVID hit, initially insurance fell less than banking. Banking fell far more. It bounced also far more thanks to the liquidity awash that is flowing to India. But insurance has that ability. Simplistically put, insurance is the Hindustan lever of BFSI. And it's not that it's completely risk-free. There are risks in the business, and there is risk in the sector, and there is risk in the regulation. But if you compare it to banking and insurance, the risk factor that you will attach to insurance sector today, given where we are in the stage of evolution of insurance, is extremely less, and that's what makes it extremely attractively priced for the growth it offers and for the ROE it offers. So just imagine if you get HDFC Life, which is going to grow faster than HDFC Bank, which delivers higher ROE than HDFC Bank, and which is available at the same valuation as HDFC Bank. Why would you buy HDFC Bank? Why would you not buy HDFC Life? Just to make it more topical.
Right. So okay, that's quite intuitive and quite a contrast on insurance and banking. So got a very interesting question. I feel it's interesting. What you told me is there's two ways you can make money. One is either growth or other is re-rating. This is typically a large cap portfolio with your average market cap close to 1,25,000 crore, or thereabout. Is your portfolio poised to get some windfall gains from re-rating? And if not, are you looking at a typical growth mindset? I know you said that India is a typical growth kind of a market, but I feel that the market could offer a lot of re-rating opportunities even in the large cap, like we saw ICICI Bank, like we saw M&M recently, Axis Bank. These were large caps that were re-rating candidates and they got re-rated. So it's not like large cap may re-rating is not valid. It works there also. So how's your portfolio positioned to take advantage of that?
So two things there, Sankar. One is, as you would notice, that our portfolio really is anything but popular stocks. And as a result, the scope of re-rating always exists. But having said that, when we think about making money from these stocks or these businesses, rather, I don't like to call them stocks, I rather call them businesses. When we think about making money from these businesses, do we factor in re-rating? Answer is no. It has to cut our minimum return threshold on sheer growth front, on sheer earnings growth or cash flow growth. And our predicament or our target price setting is always on that. Because P re-rating, D-rating is extremely difficult to forecast. It is extremely difficult to suggest. Although I completely agree with you, if you were to put a gun to my head and if you were to ask me, I definitely do think there is immense scope. As I told you, right, there is just simple again. The portfolio ROE is better than Nifty. The portfolio growth will be better than Nifty, and the portfolio is cheaper than Nifty. So there is no reason to believe why the re-rating cannot happen over the next 2 years, 3 years. But is that part of a base case? Answer is no. If re-rating comes, we will take it, but we don't plan for it. We plan only for growth. We do what we can forecast. We do what we understand.
Right. Okay. So another question is that it's a little bit general question, not particularly to your portfolio. Thank you, Mr. Rahul, for having asked this. सब कुछ हो गया अभी बिहार इलेक्शन हो गया, यूएस में इलेक्शन हो गया, Now probably at some point in time the transfer of power will also happen. Liquidity bhi aa gaya bazaar mein. What is left, and what happens if there's a vacuum created by liquidity being reduced? Although my firm belief is that liquidity is not going to go anywhere, we're going to be sufficiently flushed with cash for a very long time. What is your opinion on the drivers of the market? I mean, it has been a stellar bull run. I mean, there are some pockets of companies that have done really well, like automobiles have done well, FMCG have done well. Consumer retail companies like Trent have surprisingly done quite decent. So there are pockets in the economy that have done well. There overall, the broader sense is that we are in some sort of crisis. So what do you think will drive the stock market in the next few months? And with that, we will also conclude today's session. Over to you.
I think, Rahul, you mentioned everything, but you missed the most important thing: earnings growth. And I think that is what has been missing so far. And that is what will come in a big way. I personally think that our value portfolio will deliver more than 35% earnings growth next year. 35% earnings growth logically should reflect in the stock performance also. So all you said rightly, right? Everything has happened. Jo hona tha sab ho gaya. But what is the, as we call, the heart of the investing, which is earnings growth, wo nahi hua hai. And we firmly believe wo hoga. And over the next 3 years, I think it's going to be all about earnings growth. And I would really urge this to all your viewers, Sankalpo. I think we really focus a lot on portfolio performance, stock performance. I would really urge you all to really consider the fact of profit growth of the portfolio also, because that is the real truth. That is a delivered truth. Stock performance is a mirage of liquidity, and liquidity sucking and liquidity coming. So to that extent, as long as your earnings growth of the portfolio is holding up, out it at a reasonable price, I think you are almost certain to make money.
Right. That's a very important point. Earnings growth. सब आ गया है, मतलब मिठाई में शक्कर ही नहीं पड़ा है, right? Okay, so that was a very, very intuitive call, and I think I got to know a lot. Insurance is something that I'm going to take away from this call as a very constructive sector. Let me advise to my viewers at this point in time: no stocks discussed are to be construed as an advice here. And the answer to the question that we asked on the trivia, that which fund manager's equity fund was the first to cross an NAV of 1,000? The answer is Sunil Singhania. Congratulations, most of you have guessed it right. Thank you, Shrey, for being on the call today. Viewers, do subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you can always find all of our videos there. We will look forward to you, Shrey, for being on our platform next quarter also, when we come with the new set of numbers, and then the year again when your 35% kind of profit growth comes through. And all the best. We thank all our investor friends for coming on the call today. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.